On Friday, the 11th of May 2012, a fire ripped through a family home in Derby in the East Midlands. Trapped inside and fast asleep were 6 young children.
The fire brigade were in the house, flashing lights everywhere. I pushed to the front of the house and I could see the firefighters bringing the children out, some in blankets. And the ambulance were trying to resuscitate some of them.
Firefighters and paramedics battled in vain to save their lives. All 6 children died. The youngest was just 5 years old.
The damage to the house is drastic, and there is no way that those poor 6 children could possibly have escaped. Smoke inhalation alone would have been deadly.
But this was no accident. As Mick Philpott, the children's father, wept in front of the British public, he was hiding a sinister secret. He had deliberately started the fire.
I think that the most tragic part of this case is the fact that 6 children's lives were lost in Mick Philpott's attempts to basically rescue his own ego.
Mick Philpott had set out to look like a hero, but he'd ended up as one of the world's most evil killers. As news broke across Britain in May 2012 that 6 young children had died inside a burning family home on Victory Road in Allenton, Derby, the entire nation were in shock. The parents, 56-year-old Mick Philpott and his wife, 31-year-old Mairead, were unharmed but completely heartbroken. Their 5 sons and 1 daughter, aged between 5 and 13 years old, were dead. Former neighbour to the Philpotts, Daniel Stevenson, witnessed the horrific event.
My brother woke me up, and that's when I looked out the window, seeing thick black smoke coming from the house. I got out of bed, got dressed, got pyjamas on, trainers, ran out the door, went straight to the property. Just wanted to help, so there was no way of getting in through the front, so I went round the back, climbed over the caravan, and dropped down the other side. I got into the back garden. I seen Mick and Mairead there, just crying, screaming, shouting.
Despite brave attempts from the emergency services, nobody could get inside. The fire was just too ferocious.
Fire coming out of the letterbox, fire coming from around the sides of the doors.
By the time it was safe to enter the house, it was too late. 5 of the children, 10-year-old Jade and her brothers John, Jack, Jesse and Jaden, had all lost their lives. 13-year-old Dwayne died later at hospital. However, it wasn't a tragic accident. Unbelievably, the house fire was part of a deliberate plan. Mick Philpott had masterminded everything for his own benefit.
I think that Mick Philpott did an incredibly evil and an incredibly selfish thing. He was essentially looking to get revenge for a perceived wrong against him by a woman who he thought was under his control.
His story begins over 60 years ago. Mick Philpott was born in 1956. He grew up in Derby as part of a large Roman Catholic family.
It would have been an environment in which his parents' attention was diluted across many children, so he wouldn't have been the centre of attention by any means. And we know that his mother worked very hard. She had a job at a factory that she only retired from when she was quite old. So he didn't appear to come from an unusual background by any means.
In 1975, aged 19, Philpott joined the army. He began to show signs of a violent temper, especially towards his girlfriends. It would repeatedly land him in trouble. Local journalist Martin Naylor recalls the events that led to Philpott being arrested in 1978.
When Mick was a youngster, I think 19 or 20, maybe 21, he ended up with a conviction for attempted murder, for which he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. The story with that is that He had a girlfriend back in Derby. He was stationed wherever his regiment were. She'd had the temerity to sending me a Dear John letter ending their relationship, so he decided to go AWOL from the army, rock up at her house in Derby and attack her with a knife. And then when her mother tried to intervene, he attacked the mother too.
Despite his 7-year sentence for attempted murder and grievous bodily harm, Philpott served just over 3 years. He was released in 1981.
From that point onwards, Philpott set about controlling every woman he had any contact with, and to do so in the most outrageous way.
Those who knew Philpott were surprised to hear just how violent his past had been.
Well, I know Mick can handle himself, so like, if anyone was intimidating towards him, he wasn't afraid to pump his chest out and stand up to him and so forth. So I know he had quite a strong reaction when people kind of pushed him. The bit that shocked me was I didn't know that he tried to kill his ex-partner.
After his release from prison, Philpott had a series of volatile relationships. In 1986, at the age of 30, he got married for the first time and fathered 2 sons and a daughter. He later had 2 more children with a teenage girlfriend and began to have several relationships simultaneously. By the time he was 50, Philpott had fathered a total of 17 children.
I think he would have gone for any woman that go for him, but in his case, he went for younger girls, usually girls who were very upset and down and depressed, either because they came out of a bad relationship or they were mistreated by their parents. Girls that had no self-esteem. You can pick them out of a crowd. You know, they think they're ugly, they think that they're inadequate, they think that they cannot have a boyfriend, that everybody hates them, that the world hates them. All they need is a little bit of love. Is somebody to be there and show them that they are beautiful, that they matter, that they are somebody. And he knew how to do that. He would approach the girls that were like in the lowest they could be, and he would be that person.
In 2000, he met Marie Duffy, a 19-year-old single mother. But within a year, he'd met a 16-year-old who became another of his conquests. She, too, was a single mother at 16. In 2003, Philpott marries Marie Duffy, but keeps his full-time live-in mistress. In fact, she's the bridesmaid at the marriage to Marie Duffy. It becomes a ménage à trois, both bearing his children, living in a council house in Allenton, near Derby. They are, well, one can only describe it as extraordinary.
Mick Philpott was a man who was incredibly manipulative, incredibly controlling, and had managed to basically convince these 2 women over a course of several years that this was, you know, a really good thing, that actually they were lucky to have some of his attention.
In 2006, 50-year-old Mick Philpott was unemployed and living on benefits in a council house with his wife Mairead, his mistress Lisa, and their ever-growing, far from traditional family.
He had approached us as the Telegraph to say that he was living in the house with his wife and his then girlfriend. They had children together, there were lots of them there, and he wanted a bigger council house. So we thought that by coming to his local newspaper, he would get a bigger council house. So we ran the story. The following day, it was picked up on by all the nationals, especially some of the more right-leaning ones, as you'd imagine. One of them, I think one of the tabloids dubbed him Shameless Mick, and the media frenzy roller coaster went on from there.
In 2007, Philpott appeared on the Jeremy Kyle Show to talk about his large family and his lifestyle. He began to draw attention from the general public.
He becomes quite famous as a benefits scrounger because he significantly never has a job and is claiming at one point $60,000 a year in benefits as well as being given a house. And he parks a caravan effectively at the side of the semi-detached council house he's living in which he alternates. He sleeps there one night with the wife, Marie Duffy, and the next night with his mistress, as though he's some kind of emperor.
I think that Mick Philpott breathes the oxygen of publicity. I think he absolutely regales in being the centre of attention. He loves being talked about. And I don't think the nature of attention matters very much to him. It doesn't matter if it's positive attention or negative attention, as long as people are talking about him.
Philpott enjoyed his newfound fame and went on to appear in other television programmes.
He then participated in a programme about benefits culture with the MP Anne Widdecombe, and he would have been absolutely loving the attention. He was basically having his malevolent ego fed from every angle here. But what he really didn't care about was the impact that this had on his family. His kids were bullied at school because of the attention that they got through him being in the press. His partner and his wife were basically labelled as stupid and ignorant. But that didn't matter. As long as people were talking about him, that's all that he cared about.
I wish I found it comical. I found it despicable. There is nothing about it that I find admirable. Philpott saw himself as some kind of grand figure, effectively bragging about his success with women, his success in scrounging on the benefits.
Mick Philpott is somebody who has to be in control. He has always got to be the one making the decisions, and other people basically have to pander to his every whim.
Philpott's wife and mistress both worked as part-time cleaners.
But far from being a source of their own income and a source of independence for them, he would basically take all of their wages. He would be the one who drove them to work, dropped them off and picked them up. He wanted to be fully in control of these women's lives. They didn't even have their own house keys.
In 2012, 56-year-old Mick Philpott was living with his wife, his mistress and their 11 children in a council house in Derbyshire. By now, Philpott was known nationally as a benefit scrounger. But little was known about his controlling behaviour, his volatile temper, and his obsession with sex that included regular threesomes with his wife Mairead and a friend, Paul Mosley.
There were like 11 kids in the house, a small house, 2 sexual partners, and he used to bring a friend for sex parties and stuff. It's a horrible environment with the kids in the house and stuff, and you're doing all this. So it doesn't take an expert to realize, okay, this is not a good situation.
And these sexual exploits of Mick and Mairead didn't stop at home.
There was an incident where they went out dogging in Allestree Park. Now, people who live in Derby know that Allestree is a relatively affluent area, and to hear that people have been going there to watch other people having sex in cars sort of comes across as quite a shock. And so it was seedy.
In February 2012, Philpott's mistress, Lisa, decided she'd had enough of life in the dysfunctional household. She moved out with her 5 children and demanded custody.
A lot of people won't have that courage, but she just decided, look, enough is enough. She did the right thing. She didn't go up to him and say, I'm leaving you. Because I think if she tried doing that, he would overpower her because he was a violent person and say, no, you're not leaving, or maybe lock her in. He would have done something. But she did the right thing. She walked away first and then sent him a message and said, I'm gone, and then he couldn't find her anymore.
This was a point at which Lisa had decided to take control, to take her children and to go to a women's refuge. And the key thing here is that Mick hadn't decided that that was okay. He was the one that decided when relationships were over. He was the one that decided what happened on a daily basis. So the fact that Lisa had betrayed him by taking that power away from him, it was only going to result in something really alarming in return.
Lisa moving out left financial implications for Philpott. Not only did he lose her income as a cleaner, but also the benefits he received for their children. The custody hearing was set for May the 11th. Philpott concocted a plan to ensure the children would be returned to Victory Road.
Out of the vanity and arrogance of the man, together with his wife Mairead and Paul Mosley, the kind of live-in, sometime lover, they hatch a scheme to set fire to the house in Victory Road in an effort to provoke the council to give him a bigger house, but also to blame his mistress. She will not get the custody of the children. It is an extraordinary, bizarre plan.
I think Mairead was very much under Mick Philpott's control at this point in time. I think he would have quite easily have talked her around into actually being a part of this.
It was a badly devised plan. To me, what convinced him is his own stupidity. He was self-absorbed. He thought that he was the king. You know, he got all the girls he wanted, and he could control them and everything. And maybe Philpott thought that he was that intelligent, that it was that easy to devise a plan that he could get back on the girl. So he probably sat down, wrote down the plan very quickly. This is what we're gonna do, right? Very easy.
In the early hours of Friday, May the 11th, 2012, the same day as the scheduled custody hearing, Philpott, aided by his wife Mairead and their friend Paul Mosley, poured petrol through the letterbox and set the family home alight. 6 of Philpott's children were sleeping upstairs.
The fire that he set, that they have set between them, takes hold at a pace far greater than they could possibly have conceived. And the house is literally filled with smoke in a matter of instants. In his typically vainglorious way, Philpott makes a particularly appalling 999 call, saying, "My children are inside."
They was on the phone to the emergency services, I believe, and they were saying that my house is on fire and it was like my baby, and obviously they told the emergency service, my neighbours here. It was very like misty because everything's just happening so fast. I attempted to go into the house. I got as far as the kitchen, couldn't go any further. The smoke was just too thick, it was choking, black, couldn't see anything, so I had to come back out. There was ladders at the side going up to a window. I tried climbing up to there, and there was a ratchet in the window where Mick's been trying to smash in, I think, and there was smoke coming from that window. I then came back down the ladders and I climbed up onto a wooden frame, what he's been built in, onto his conservatory.
The damage to the house is drastic, and there is no way that those poor 6 children could possibly have escaped. Smoke inhalation alone would have been deadly.
I climbed up to the windows, see if any windows were open. None of them were open. Then put one of the windows through with a wrench from the other window. I chucked it at the window. It smashed straight through. I then continued putting the window through with the pickaxe on the roof, smashing all the window up. I was about to climb into the property. Again, couldn't see nothing, couldn't hear nothing, and hear no screams.
When the fire service arrived, the desperate attempts to save the children continued. The local press soon got wind of the unfolding drama on Victory Road.
I was on the early shift on the morning of the fire, and I could hear that the news desk phone was ringing. So I made a bit of a dash for it. I grabbed the phone, and it was the on-duty police press officer. And she said to me, "We're just letting the local media know early that there's been a really big house fire in Allington and 5 kids are dead." Within about 5 or 10 minutes of knowing that it was in Victory Road, I phoned the local newsagent who I'd know because I'd done previous stories with him. He answered the phone and I said, "Joe Gurritz Martin from the Telegraph." And he said, "It's Mick Philpott, it's Mick Philpott's house." And I didn't even have to ask him what it was about. He knew, and he'd blurted that out straight away.
Shocked neighbours began to spill out onto the street as the full horror of the tragedy became apparent.
I think nearly the whole street was out on the front. The fire brigade were in the house, flashing lights everywhere. I pushed to the front of the house and I could see the firefighters bringing the children out. Some in blankets. I think they used the blankets to try and protect some of it. Bit more. And the ambulance were trying to resuscitate some of them. I was just hoping that the kids would survive and recover. It's just didn't really know what to think at the time. Didn't know what had happened, didn't know what caused the fire, just didn't know anything.
Tragically, 5 of Philpott's children died at the scene. 10-year-old Jade, 9-year-old John, 8-year-old Jack, 6-year-old Jesse, and Jaden, who was just 5 years old. Their older brother, 13-year-old Dwayne, was rushed to hospital in a critical condition, but would later succumb. to his injuries.
It almost defies self-deception. It is disgraceful. But at the outset, the police believe that this is something that has genuinely a tragedy. 6 children, no adults in the house. You might ask, why weren't there any adults in the house?
Forensic experts arrived at the scene and began to look for clues to determine the source of the fire. Daniel Matthews was part of the team.
Mostly the house was pretty much undamaged. There was the roof was intact, the walls were intact. The front door was noticeably more damaged than anywhere else, and also the window on the landing. There's a small window on the landing upstairs that had been damaged by the fire and had dropped out. But apart from that, the only way you could really tell there was a fire at the house was by small signs of some soot coming out from the vents at the top of some of the double-glazed windows. The fire had started in the entrance hallway behind the front door. And from there it had spread a little bit into the living room, but mostly it had spread up the stairs. The window at the very top of the stairs was open a little bit, and that had been breached by the fire. Now, obviously fire tends to go up and out, so effectively the stairwell from a fire in there would act almost like a chimney, in that the fire and the hot gases and the fumes would all mostly go upstairs.
In cooperation with the fire investigators, the forensic team needed to find out if the blaze was accidental or if someone had started it on purpose.
We had an arson dog handler with us that day. And that dog is trained to indicate on various different ignitable liquids such as petrol, diesel, white spirit, and the things that we commonly see in arsons. And the dog clearly indicated that he thought something was present. So we would take a sample from that area, and then it would be sent for analysis. And the analysis determined that petrol was there. When I completed my scene examination, I was able to say that the fire had been started deliberately.
As the sun rose on the morning of Friday, May the 11th, 2012, the true horror of the house fire on Victory Road in Derby became apparent. Investigations had revealed that the blaze which had killed 6 children had been started deliberately. Bereaved father Mick Philpott had seemingly made desperate attempts to save them. But in reality, he had orchestrated the whole thing to try and win custody of 5 of his other children from his former mistress.
I think Philpott thought that nobody would ever leave him because he was so amazing. So I think it was a combination of everything. When somebody leaves you, there's another thing that happens to the human brain. It's like jealousy automatically happens, right? For one reason, we are all, and in Philpott's case even more because he was so self-absorbed, you think you are the best thing on earth.
Mick Philpott's plan was essentially to exact revenge on Lisa. He'd moved from trying to control her by keeping her in a relationship with him to trying to destroy her for leaving it. He was vile towards her. He made threats towards her through other people. She was incredibly frightened. And what he was trying to do was essentially create a story, create a set of events that he could blame her for.
I think what convinced him that this thing would work was himself. You know, his stupidity and his self-absorption that he thought, I'm too good, this plan is infallible.
On Saturday, the 12th of May, the day after the fire, Philpott's ex-mistress Lisa and her brother-in-law were arrested on suspicion of starting the blaze. It seemed that Philpott's plan to frame her was working out, but they were soon released without charge. Police were treating the deliberate fire as a murder investigation after it was confirmed that petrol had been found inside the letterbox.
The police start to talk to the neighbours, who point out that Philpott is this conceited pig of a man, and they begin to put together what actually happened. They find evidence of a petrol can, they find a glove.
Detectives began to grow suspicious of the Philpotts and their possible motives. On Wednesday, the 16th of May 2012, Mick Philpott held an emotional press conference, unaware that he was the police's #1 suspect.
Didn't Philpott know that the police has experts on reading people? You know, they have people who are trained for years on reading body language, facial expressions, eye movement, voice intonation, you know, everything.
Philpott appeared to be distraught when he faced the cameras with a visibly grief-stricken Mairead. He started to thank people who tried to help on the night of the fire.
And of course, the 4 firemen, the police, the ambulances, the doctors, the nurses, literally everybody who tried to help save our children, they couldn't.
One intrigued viewer was body language expert Robert Phipps.
Mick Philpott is very controlled throughout the whole interview, making a point of thanking everybody else but not really mentioning the children that have just died. The signals that he gives off are not in the normal range of somebody expressing grief, anxiety, sadness, which he should do having just lost his children. Somebody normally expressing grief, you would see contorting of the face, not just one consistent look. And this is what you have with Mick, is one consistent look throughout the whole thing. His face is not going through the turmoil as compared to Mairead, who you see her eyebrows are moving, her forehead has got different wrinkles in it, her face is just contorted with pain. We don't see any of that from Mick.
If ever evidence were needed of Philpott's capacity for being disingenuous, for convincing the world, and I suspect himself into the bargain, that he alone was right, it was in the classic case of his crocodile tears during the televised press conference. Those tears were yet further evidence of his capacity for self-delusion, which is one of the hallmarks of his life, along with the capacity to believe that he alone can dictate what happens to the world.
Right from the beginning, Mick Philpott's body language is inconsistent with somebody showing grief. His blinking rate is far, far too high. The normal range is around about 20, 25 blinks per minute. We counted in this as much as 80 to 90 blinks a minute. This is showing his nervousness. Mick is dabbing away with his tissue here to imaginary tears. They're not there, therefore the tissue itself doesn't get wet, it doesn't crumple. If you look at that in comparison to Mairead's tissue, it's all crumpled because she is actually expressing tears, real, genuine tears. If you look at the lines on their forehead, these are just straight lines. There's no expression. These are his normal, everyday lines. If you look at Mairead's face, she's raised her eyebrows. They've come in, so she's got a furrowed brow, and she's pulling these eyebrows in, which shows the pain that she's going through. You can also see the way her mouth is contorted and changing with each expression of different emotions. Mick is consistent all the way through. One thing that they don't do throughout the entire press conference is appeal for help. Who set this fire? Who killed these children? Why? Because he knows he did it.
It wasn't just the police who were suspicious. Philpott's performance had baffled the onlooking press too.
At the end of it, I got in the car to drive back to the office and I thought, that's not right. Something's not right about that. He's not once mentioned the children. He's not mentioned them by name. He's not looked into any cameras and said, please, will someone out there help me find out who's done this? It's a suspicious fire in his own home, and not once has he made an appeal to the public, to anyone who's watching, please, anyone with information, come forward. Not once. So then I got back to the office, and as I walked in, I could see everyone was still stood around the TV, and we all looked at each other, and that was the moment that we all knew, something's wrong here. This is a game changer.
Disingenuous would be a polite way of describing it. It is typical of a man who believes he alone rules the world. He is an emperor of everything he surveys. He is a man whose vanity knows no bounds, a man for whom he is the centre of the universe, which in the end convinced the police that he wasn't telling the truth, that he seemed so capable of this kind of sleight of hand. He may have convinced himself, but he didn't convince many other people.
I think he's such a narcissist, he's so arrogant, and he thinks he's gotten away with it, that he thinks he's invincible. He thinks that his act, as he's fooled many women over the years, is going to fool the rest of us, and it certainly didn't.
The residents of Victory Road who'd rallied round the family also started to wonder what was going on.
Her behaviour was strange. He did ask me if He thought the police. He said he thought the police was blaming him. He did say that to me. They think he did it and stuff like that.
88 officers working on the case had taken over 5,000 statements from local residents, some of which suggested that the police themselves had made more of an effort to save the 6 children than the Philpots. On May the 29th, 2012, 18 days after the fatal blaze, Mick Philpott and his wife Mairead were arrested on suspicion of murder.
And again, that was another strange scenario because I was sat at my desk and a press release pings into my inbox that says a 56-year-old man and a 31-year-old woman have been arrested on suspicion of murder in connection with the Victory Road fire. And immediately I stood up and I shouted over to news desk. I said, the Philpots have been arrested on suspicion of murder. And that was the second time in 2 weeks that we ran a special edition of the newspaper, and that had never happened before. Although the police wouldn't confirm on the record that this is who it was, we got confirmation via other sources that it, if we said it's the Philpots that's been arrested, would we be wrong? No.
On the 22nd of June, funeral services for 13-year-old Duane, 10-year-old Jade, 9-year-old John, 8-year-old Jack, 6-year-old Jesse and 5-year-old Jaden were held at St Mary's Catholic Church in Derby. In the days after the deadly fire, the local community had raised more than £15,000 to pay for the funerals. Mick and Mairead Philpott were not allowed to attend.
It's very close-knit, Allington. Derby as a city is a small city, but it's a very proud city. And Allington and some of the neighbouring areas to it, and some of the, I hasten to use the word poorer areas, but the less affluent areas, it's very close-knit, really close-knit. I mean, the outpouring of emotion from the community was huge.
On the 5th of November, a further arrest was made. Forensic evidence had found petrol on the clothing of not just Mick and Mairead Philpott, but also their friend Paul Mosley. All 3 were originally charged with murder, but in December these charges were downgraded to manslaughter. The police accepted that, although they'd started the blaze, they had not intended to kill the children.
It beggars belief to me that this charge is downgraded to manslaughter because, according to the statements at the time, Philpott, his wife and Mosley didn't mean to kill the children. It's a tiny semi-detached house and you've got 6 small children and you set fire to it. How can you not expect at least one of those children to die? It defies belief to me.
At a hearing on December the 17th, all 3 pleaded not guilty to manslaughter, meaning a trial would have to take place. On the 12th of February 2013, at Nottingham Crown Court, prosecutors set out to prove that Mick Philpott had made a plan that went horribly wrong. Local reporter Martin Naylor was in the courtroom.
I remember Mick, when he gave evidence, talking about hearing a whooshing noise. When you light petrol, you're not lighting the fluid, you're lighting the fumes that's come off it. And in the time that it's taken for someone to put the petrol through the letterbox, and then for someone, probably him, to light it, this vapour was all up in the air. There was a huge whoosh. What he was describing was the whoosh of the fire going flying up the stairs. Now, those stairs had also been recently painted with, I think, yacht varnish or yacht paint, which is highly flammable. So the children, although there were working smoke alarms in there, they had no chance. They literally had no chance. And obviously the cause of death was the effects of smoke inhalation.
Forensic expert Daniel Matthews was called to give evidence.
I did some DNA work on the petrol cans that were found, and I did some DNA work on some items of clothing that were found in the house to determine whether or not they could have been worn by occupants of the house. And I did some microscopic burn damage examination, which would have potentially indicated whether a wearer of some items of clothing could have been close to an ignitable liquid when it was ignited.
But because of the ferocity of the fire, no evidence remained inside the house. However, traces of petrol had been found on all 3 of the defendants' clothes. In one of the trial's key moments, Mick Philpott was asked to give his version of the events from the night that led to the tragic death of 6 of his own children.
When Mick took the stand, he was the showman that he always was. Again, he was crying, or supposedly crying, in the dock. But the prosecution saw through all of that. I don't think there was one single thing that nailed him. I think it was just, the case just built up and built up and built up and was so strong. It was almost like piling bricks on top of him, just waiting for him to collapse. And I think his collapse came in his cross-examination, because his denials were just absolutely ripped apart.
During the trial, what we've got to remember is that this is essentially another stage on which Mick Philpott performs. He is playing to an audience. There are several outbursts of anger, and when his relatives shout at him in court, he shouts back at them and he sticks his middle finger up to them. So he really is incredibly defiant. He's incredibly showman-like in his personality. He wants to be the centre of attention. He knows that the media circus is still going on, and he wants to be the ringleader.
On April the 2nd, 2013, after an emotionally exhausting 8-week trial, the jury found the trio guilty of manslaughter.
I recall one of Mairead's sisters standing up in the public gallery and shouting to her, "I knew on day one you'd done this. I knew you'd done this," before storming out. It was the first time that we'd effectively live blogged from court. We'd been given permission by the judge, and my fingers were trembling as I was, typing things out to send back to the office for them to, on the website straight away, guilty verdict, guilty verdict.
On April the 4th, 2013, during sentencing, Judge Mrs. Justice Thirlwall told the trio, "All 3 of you are responsible for the deliberate setting of that fire. All 3 of you are responsible for those deaths." Mairead Philpott and Paul Mosley were each sentenced to 17 years. 56-year-old Mick Philpott was sentenced to life. He was immediately sent to Wakefield Prison in West Yorkshire. Mrs. Justice Thirlwall described him as a disturbingly dangerous man and as the driving force behind the wicked plan.
In my opinion, Philpott should have been given a whole life term. And I do not approve of whole life terms, but I cannot think of anyone who more richly deserves to spend the rest of his life behind bars than Mick Philpott, who killed 6 of his own children. He is a man who deserves nothing but the greatest contempt. And I cannot understand, I will never understand, why he was not charged and convicted of murder.
One small mercy it is that they would probably have died very quickly, but that didn't really help the poor firefighters who had to give evidence and tell about bringing the bodies out of the house and putting them on the lawn and trying to keep them alive outside.
For the neighbours who tried to rescue the children, it was an emotional moment.
I was relieved that it was over. I was a bit shocked that it was him. Because if you did see him with his kids, his family, very heartbreaking. Because he did love his kids. He's shown that very much. I think it was some sort of ploy to get something out of. I didn't think it was meant to spread that fast, the fire. I didn't think it was meant to kill anyone. I think it was a very stupid thing to do. And unfortunately, he paid for it.
The case has had a lasting effect on the nation, nowhere more so than in Derby itself.
I think the initial impact was massive. I think it was huge. Certainly at the time of the fire and in the next almost year until the guilty verdict came in, it was the biggest story that Derby's ever seen. I once thought to myself, and I once said, that I didn't think Derby would get over this. I thought it was too big and too tragic a story for a city the size of Derby could forget. But it has, and it's got stronger. The city's definitely got stronger. It's united people, and he is the common enemy of the city where he was born and raised.
Philpott was the evil ringleader in a despicable plan that led to the death of 6 innocent children.
To me, it sounds like Philpott was more upset that the plan didn't work than the loss of the kids. I think he will hit them. I think he hits any father, you know, unless you are a 100% psychopath, which is like you have zero emotions toward other human beings and you pretend everything. And I don't think he was that detached.
I think that Mick Philpott did an incredibly evil and an incredibly selfish thing. He was essentially looking to get revenge for a perceived wrong against him by a woman who he thought was under his control. The most tragic part of this case is the fact that 6 children's lives were lost in Mick Philpott's attempts to basically rescue his own ego. My view of him as a criminologist, he was an incredibly narcissistic and a very dangerous man. He was always going to result in somebody else being harmed. His actions would always lead to someone else coming to harm because it was all about him. He never had any empathy, any concern for anybody else.
There is not one single word you can find to explain or apologise for his actions. Seldom have I ever thought of someone as grotesque and as thoughtless and as vain as Philpott is. There is something about him that genuinely does send a chill down your spine.
Mick Philpott is a greedy and selfish man. His lust for revenge on a woman who left him led to the death of 6 of his own children. He may not have meant to have killed them, but his devious plan in which he involved his wife and a friend meant that Dwayne, Jade, John, Jack, Jesse and Jaden died in the most horrific way. The city of Derby now chooses to remember them and not the name of Mick Philpott, one of the world's most evil killers. In July 2010, one man declared war on the Northumbria police force.
You wanted me to kill myself, but I'm going to give you a chance, because I am hunting for officers now.
After being released from prison, 37-year-old Raoul Moat shot his ex-girlfriend, killed her new partner, and critically injured a police officer, shooting him at point-blank range.
Moat rang the 999 system again and just basically asked Northumbria Police, "Do you believe me now? I've just downed one of your guys."
The search for Raoul Moat had become the biggest news story in the country.
People were following every move of this, and during that week of the manhunt, people had their televisions and their radios switched on round the clock.
After a dramatic standoff with police aired live on British television, Moat turned the shotgun on himself and pulled the trigger.
He wanted to be iconic, he wanted to be infamous, he wanted to go out with a bang and not a whimper.
In just 7 days, Raoul Moat had etched his name in history as one of the world's most evil killers. It was a news story that gripped the nation. In the early hours of Saturday, the 10th of July 2010, 37-year-old Raoul Moat shot himself after a 6-hour standoff with Northumbria police. One of the biggest manhunts in UK history had come to a dramatic end. Moat had been on the run for 7 days after critically injuring his former girlfriend and killing her new boyfriend. He'd gone on to declare war on the police and shot a uniformed officer. Moat was armed, full of rage, and extremely dangerous. Jim Napier was the senior investigating officer at Northumbria Police.
It was clear that his intention was wider than just targeting his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend. He was, in his words, now targeting police officers. Therefore, it was clearly the risk and the threat had gone up quite significantly. More armed officers had to be brought to the area to support the hunt to find and arrest Moat. because that's all we ever wanted to do, was find and arrest him and bring him to justice.
He's making a lot of threats. He's saying, this is it, you've taken my life, I'm going to take yours. It's this real vendetta against the police. He's basically saying, I'm doing this because I'm entitled to. You better take me seriously.
Former Sky News anchor Jeremy Thompson was following the story as it unfolded.
It was a July day, the start of summer, and not a lot of other stories around. So one story can suddenly take hold and dominate the news agenda. So without much else around, every news outfit in the country sent their best resources up to the Newcastle area to find out more about this story and to find out more about the man that the police believe was behind it all, Raoul Moat.
And this killer story begins in 1973. Raoul Moat was born on the 17th of June in Gateshead in the northeast of England.
He was raised largely by his grandmother. His mother had some mental health issues, but she lived in the local area, so he did have some contact with her. But it wasn't anything really out of the ordinary. A lot of families have to cope with that kind of thing.
During the 1970s and 80s, the northeast of England was an area in economic decline. Its traditional heavy industries such as shipbuilding and mining were phased out, and many men lost their jobs.
It wasn't a particularly economically prosperous area, so it was always going to be a challenge for Moat to find his way in the world as a man. Many teenagers go through a lot of changes, particularly at momentous points in their teenage years. When Moat was 16, he left school, and there were some changes in him around about that time. So he became quite fixated on bodybuilding. And this is something that you often find with young working class lads in an area where the prospects of those traditional kind of tough men's jobs are few and far between. They look to other ways to become men, to make themselves visibly masculine. And I think that was what Moat was doing.
When you see the results, then in anything, you get more, oh wow, this is working. So then he went in more and more, and then he started getting to steroids.
It was clear that Moat had some serious psychiatric problems growing up, and he'd obviously decided to express himself as the big fella around town. He was 6'3", 17 stone, and liked this idea of being a large, well-built, muscle bodybuilder, and he clearly used a lot of steroids. And people who were close to him talked time and time again about just what a terrible temper he'd got.
Moat was somebody who has what I would describe as poor behavioural control. So somebody who flies off the handle quite easily, somebody who's quite readily aggravated. And if you throw steroids into the mix, you get what people often refer to as roid rage, you know, a real inability to control your temper. And it increases the levels of testosterone in the body. So when somebody has a predilection towards aggression, and then you add that on top of it, you've got a really toxic mix.
Moat had found work as a tree surgeon, and his physical appearance came in handy in his other role as a nightclub doorman. By 2005, the 32-year-old was caught by the police carrying a knuckle duster and a samurai sword. He'd fallen foul of the law on numerous occasions.
He was known to the police for incidents of domestic abuse. He had a number of partners with which he had troubled relationships with, and the police were involved. He had had arrests for, generally speaking, low-level violence.
By 2010, 37-year-old Moat had fathered several children with different partners. His latest girlfriend, Samantha, was 15 years his junior. They'd been in an on and off relationship for 6 years and had a daughter together.
Well, the relationship between Samantha and Moat was an incredibly controlling one. It's one that I classify as coercively controlling. So Moat believed that Samantha was his possession. He was in control, he decided what happened, and she basically had to suck it up and get on with it. So it was his rules. Everything was focused around him.
And he would control everything. He would control her movements, what she could buy, could not buy, what she did, who she talked to on the phone. So obviously Samantha would probably feel like completely controlled. She didn't have the right to do anything.
You often find in relationships like this, women are kind of treading on eggshells, trying not to upset their abusive partner. But at the same time, it's very, very difficult for them to leave. Often looking from the outside, we say, well, why are you staying in this relationship? And often it's to keep themselves safe because they know that if they were to leave, they'd put themselves in quite a significant amount of danger.
Samantha was desperate to leave Raoul Moat, and in the spring of 2010, a chance presented itself. Moat was convicted of assaulting a family member and sentenced to 18 weeks in Durham prison, something that only aggravated him further.
I am not a psychologist, but it was clear to me that Moat was a bit of a psychopath. He was always willing to blame others for everything that he did wrong. Everybody else was responsible. The social services were wrong, his legal team were wrong because they gave him bad advice, and the police were picking on him.
He's always laying the blame at somebody else's door because he doesn't think that he can do anything wrong, and that's a classic trait of somebody who's narcissistic.
Raoul Moat was locked away, but he was a man holding a grudge and wanted revenge. For the past 6 years, he'd been in an on and off relationship with his 22-year-old girlfriend, Samantha.
Moat being in prison had a significant impact on his relationship with Samantha. For a man like Moat, it's very, very important to be in control all of the time, especially in terms of your personal relationships. When he's removed from that domestic picture, he has to try really hard to keep control. So he's on the phone to Samantha quite a lot. He has one of his friends essentially stalking her and checking what she's up to.
While Moat was in prison, Samantha did keep in contact with him. She had a daughter to him, and she kept in touch with him for the sake of that child.
Samantha tried to convince Moat over the phone that it was over, but any talk of separation fell on deaf ears.
She was probably scared of him. You'd be scared if you have, a man that big saying, I am the man, and if you don't do what I tell you, you're gonna get hurt or something. So she didn't know how to escape. So him being put in prison to her was like, something helped her out here. She finally was away from him. But the problem was, Sam knew he was coming back.
In his mind, the relationship wasn't over. In his mind, they were going to reconcile, but she didn't have that plan at all. And the sort of straw that appears to have broken the camel's back was her announcing the fact that she was in a new relationship with Christopher Brown.
Christopher, a 29-year-old karate instructor originally from Berkshire, moved to Newcastle in October 2009. He met Samantha in June 2010, whilst Moat was still in prison. Christopher's mother, Sally, was unaware of their relationship.
As far as I know, Sam and Christopher only met each other a couple of weeks. They hadn't been going out with each other for very long at all. Christopher went up to Newcastle. He said he's going for the weekend. I said, OK, fine. And then I got a phone call sort of like a few days later, and he said, well, Mum, I've got a chance to work here with karate. I'm going to stay. I said, didn't like it, but OK, fine. And that was it. He seemed to settle down. He loved what he was doing.
Samantha had told Moat that her new boyfriend was a police officer.
Christopher was never a police officer, never. He was a karate instructor. Never even thought of joining the police force. So I think she was just trying to back Moat off. So I think that must be the only reason she told him that.
She lied to Moat because she was afraid of Moat. And she knew that when he came out, he would have gone to her and to the new boyfriend. So she started saying that he was a police officer, because that would intimidate people. She also said that he was a karate instructor, or a black belt in karate.
Periods of separation are a really high-risk time for people who've just come out of an abusive relationship, because the abuser has essentially lost control at this point in time. The victim has taken some power back and has some authority now over their own lives, and the abuser hates that, and they're going to resort to quite drastic measures to get that control back.
So the only thing he had to look forward to is going back to Sam, to the person he loved, and then she took that away from him. Right? And that would just like completely bring his anger to surface like crazy.
There's no doubt at all that those conversations while Moat was in Durham prison were the blue touch papers that ignited the bonfire that became Raoul Moat.
Moat's anger was uncontrollable. He decided he was going to kill Christopher Brown as soon as he got out of jail. He enlisted the help of a friend, Carl Ness.
Moat started planning this while he was in prison. He recruited or he used Carl Ness to keep an eye on Samantha and do what we would call surveillance by watching her house, seeing who comes and goes, identifying vehicles, and trying to identify who the new boyfriend was.
On Thursday, the 1st of July 2010, 37-year-old Raoul Moat was released from prison. He didn't waste any time. It's alleged that Carl Ness had found a shotgun for him to use.
The way in which Moat planned this was quite meticulous. He took steps to try and identify the karate instructor, i.e. Christopher, by making phone calls to health centres, to karate clubs, to the extent that he actually drove around the routes that they took on the fatal night. They actually had a dry run, if you like, on the Thursday night.
On Friday the 2nd of July, staff at Durham Prison warned Northumbria police that Moat might pose a risk to Samantha. But unfortunately, the information wasn't acted upon. The same day, Moat was captured on CCTV in Newcastle, sporting a Mohican hairstyle. Later that night, Carl Ness drove Moat to nearby Gateshead, where Samantha and Christopher were at a house party.
Moat was dropped off quite near the address that Samantha and Christopher were visiting, and he was able to walk in there and hide himself underneath the front window next to the front door, where he was able to listen because it was a July night, the window was open, it was warm.
He could hear people talking and saying things, and he picked up on things that were being said about him or things that he perceived to be about him. And he started texting his friend Ness and expressing his anger and frustration at what he was hearing. This is going on, it's really annoying me. He's essentially venting. And this is something that you see narcissistic people do quite a lot. They want an audience for their complaints and their rants. They want validation. They want other people to agree with them and say, yeah, you're completely reasonable.
Moat lay in wait outside the house.
Around about 2:30 in the morning, Samantha and Christopher leave, and as they come out the front door, Moat stood up. He was clearly armed with a gun, and pretty much without warning, he immediately shot Christopher. Christopher started trying to run away, and as he tried to run across the grass area, he was shot again, which was enough to make him fall. Moat then calmly walked over, reloaded his gun in front of witnesses, and then shot him a third time, causing his death. It was nothing more than a cold and calculated assassination.
It was a public execution. Moat had used a sawn-off shotgun to shoot Christopher Brown at point-blank range.
Certainly with a close-range discharge of a shotgun, even with small pellets, you're going to get a large mass going into the body that's going to lacerate major organs, major blood vessels, very likely to be fatal.
To create maximum damage, Moat had loaded his shotgun with lead fishing weights.
They're bigger, they're heavier, they do more damage, they're going to make those discharges more lethal.
Christopher had no chance of survival. But amidst the horror unfolding in front of her very eyes, Samantha had managed to run back into the house to seek refuge.
After he'd shot Chris, he then turned round and walked towards the house that they'd been in. He could clearly see that Samantha was in the sitting room there, and he fired a shot at Samantha which went through the window and struck her in the abdomen, causing her some critical injuries. So he fatally wounded one victim, he'd critically injured a second victim, and then he calmly walked away from the scene.
Moat had no idea whether he'd killed Samantha or not.
Well, most people, when they commit a murder, they are absolutely horrified at what they've done. They can't quite believe that the magnitude of it. They often go into a state of shock and literally don't know what they're doing afterwards. But Moat was very calm, he was very calculated. He phoned his friend, he said, "I'm full of beans." And the reason for that was because he thought he'd restored the natural order of things. He felt entitled to carry out those shootings.
Moat had casually left the scene armed with his shotgun.
For him, it seemed to have been a bit like mission accomplished, and he seemed quite calm and pleased with himself.
But he would not remain calm for long. Raoul Moat had killed Christopher Brown and critically injured Samantha in front of other party guests. The police were searching for the 37-year-old, but he was one step ahead. Moat had left a letter with a friend to deliver to detectives later in the day. It warned the police would pay for what they've done.
He had a 49-page letter that he'd written outlining his complaints about various things. And you often see this with people who are narcissistic. When they have a complaint, when they're angry about something, it's not enough for them to just make a concise statement and sum it up neatly. They will go on and on and on. And in these statements and these letters, they'll be saying, you know, this is all about victimizing me. I'm the victim here. Everybody's out to get me. And it goes on. It's embellished, it's exaggerated. He's a classic narcissist.
The same day, 300 miles away in Berkshire, uniformed officers paid a visit to Sally Brown, the mother of murdered 29-year-old karate instructor Christopher.
It was our local police that came round to me. They just said that there'd been an incident and that Christopher was dead. But then I had the family liaison officer from Newcastle on the phone, and they didn't tell me too much over the phone. I think it was a case of I wasn't listening anyway. All I heard was, "Your son's dead." That was it. You seem to sort of cut everything else off, and when you're told something like this, I think your body and your brain just goes into, how can I describe it? You're hearing people, they're talking to you. And at the time, I was at home, I was listening to these people on the phone, and I was talking to the police officers at the house with me, but I could also hear my daughter screaming in the background. She's absolutely gone hysterical. He was a lad. He was a typical little boy. He was just very happy, laughing all the time. And he would help anybody if he could. He wouldn't let anyone get hurt. He was just a nice lad. But then I'm biased, I suppose, because he's my boy. When you lose one of your children, you just can't describe it. Can't describe it. It's horrendous.
While the Brown family mourned, Raoul Moat was still on the run. His hatred towards the police was rising. Samantha had told Moat that Christopher Brown worked for them.
I think he was on the understanding Christopher was a police officer because Sam had gone in and told him that he was a police officer. Christopher has never been in the police force. He's a karate instructor, and whether she thought telling him that he would back him off a bit, I don't know.
Moat's hostility towards the police was turning into a vendetta, and he was keen for them to know who they were dealing with. In the early hours of Sunday the 4th of July, after being on the run for 24 hours, Moat dialed 999.
This is the gunman from Berkeley last night. My name is Raoul Moat. What I'm phoning about is to tell you exactly why I've done what I've done, right? Now, my girlfriend has been having an affair behind my back with one of your officers, this gentleman that I shot last night, the karate instructor, right? Now, you bastards have been on to me, right, for years. He's hassled us, harassed us, he has just won't leave us alone. You wanted me to do myself in, and I was going to do it until I found out about him properly and what was going on. And as soon as I found out, I thought, nah, you've had too much from me. You've had too much from me. You'll get your chance to kill us, right? You'll get your chance to kill us.
No, okay? we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that.
You do wanted me to kill myself, but I'm going to give you a chance, because I am hunting for officers now.
Raoul Moat spent a number of minutes ranting on the phone, effectively declaring war on Northumbria Police and saying, I'm coming to get you. You have ruined my life. I'm coming to get you.
Essentially, he wants an audience, he wants to vent, and this call really is a poor me monologue. He's saying to the operator, this is all your fault, you being the police, you've done this to me. It's all about him. It's saying, these are the reasons why I've done what I've done, because I've been driven to it by other people. I'm not responsible.
After making the 999 call, Moat had stepped up his vendetta against the police. A friend, Karam Awan, was driving him around in a black Lexus. Moat was actively hunting for police officers.
Moat's two closest associates in the criminal underworld were Ness and Awan. They assisted him the moment that he left Durham prison.
Shortly after making his threatening call to police, Moat spotted a sitting police car at a roundabout in the Denton area. Inside was 42-year-old PC David Rathband.
Moats approached the car from behind, tapped on the passenger window, and David turned, and as soon as he turned, Moat shot once through the window, which hit David right in the middle of the face. He fell into the foot compartment of his car.
Despite his serious condition, PC Rathband tried to activate the emergency button in his vehicle. Moat then shot him for a second time and calmly walked away.
Moat was on the anger rampage. If he had passed another police officer on a motorcycle, he probably would have stopped and shot him as well. If there was a police officer in the shop, he probably would shoot him as well. It's because he only found one. If he had found more, he would have shot more.
When Raoul Moat shot PC David Rathband, it signified a real escalation in his offending. This wasn't just about Raoul Moat and people who had annoyed him.
It was a callous attack. David Rathband had sustained life-threatening injuries. He had survived, but he would never see again.
As a forensic pathologist, if you're told somebody has been shot at very close range in the face with a shotgun, you're expecting to perform an autopsy. That person is almost certainly dead. I think it's almost miraculous that David Rathband survived what happened to him. You can see from the x-rays the number of little pellets in him. Any one of those could easily have gone and struck something utterly vital and killed him. He's being shot in the face.
Moat made yet another 999 call. He was determined to make sure the police knew it was him who'd shot the 42-year-old father of two.
Within maybe an hour of that incident, Moat basically asked Northumbria Police, do you believe me now? I've just downed one of you guys, and just remind colleagues in Northumbria that I'm coming to get you. And that was a big game changer in this manhunt.
What appeared at first to be a domestic dispute with a fatal outcome was quickly evolving into a much bigger story with nationwide interest. Jeremy Thompson was the anchor for Sky News.
Within 24 hours, policeman David Rathband had been shot in the face. A rare occurrence for a policeman to be shot in Britain. That really ramped up the story. The media poured into the northeast very quickly. It became an unprecedented manhunt over that long, hot July week up in the northeast of England. And the media interest was intense. People had their televisions and their radios switched on round the clock.
It was a difficult time for the Brown family.
I couldn't turn the news on because every time something came up about it, it was always Raoul Moat's photo. that they were showing, because he was the one that was on the run and what have you. But even afterwards, I said to the police once that it seems as though Christopher was a number put under the carpet.
The following day, Monday the 5th of July, it emerged that Moat had posted on his Facebook page, "I've lost everything. Watch and see what happens." With his behaviour becoming increasingly erratic, the authorities were warning the public not to approach him.
This wasn't just about Raoul Moat and his personal issues with his relationships. This represented a real risk to the public, so the scale of this case now was incredibly significant.
It was an operation that was supported by police forces from across the country. Colleagues from London, Liverpool, Manchester. There was equipment sent from Northern Ireland. There was a huge response to this because day-to-day policing had to continue. In the Northumbria police area, they had to be there in numbers and they had to have the right equipment. They had to be armed.
It was on an epic scale. They had not only got 160 armed officers, but also they'd got special armoured vehicles. They'd got specially trained tracker dogs. They'd got helicopters up, and they'd even got an RAF jet up there running reconnaissance missions over that whole area. It was an extraordinary reaction to what they knew at the time to be perhaps no more than one man with a gun on the loose.
After shooting and blinding PC David Rathband at point-blank range on Sunday, July the 4th, Moat had gone off the radar.
2 shooting incidents in 24 hours and then gone. No more phone calls, no more messages. He just vanished into thin air.
We did not know where he was. He had come down, caused all that damage and then disappeared.
Police appealed to the gunman to turn himself in, but Moat remained on the loose, armed and extremely dangerous. On the 6th of July, the black Lexus Moat had used when he shot PC Rathband was found abandoned in the small town of Rothbury, 30 miles north of Newcastle. Police set up a 2-mile exclusion zone and urged residents to stay indoors.
The hunt suddenly started to focus on a very pretty market town called Rothbury, right on the edge of the Northumberland National Park, a beautiful little town on the Coquet River, surrounded by glorious but pretty remote countryside, and presumably Moat knew pretty well and felt that he could steer clear of the police around there, and whatever game he had in mind, whatever he was doing to taunt the police at the time or to evade the police, he felt it was his best bet.
There was still no sign of Moat, but police had found an abandoned campsite in Rothbury and a dictaphone with recordings of Moat complaining how unhappy he was with the media reports about his private life. He also made threats to the general public unless the stories stopped.
So he's listening to what's going on in the media, he's following the coverage. So all of this is going to be fueling his aggravation and his sense of annoyance, essentially. So this is somebody who's becoming incredibly dangerous, the more bruised their ego becomes.
On Wednesday the 7th of July 2010, police found yet another letter in a tent. It was addressed to his ex-girlfriend Samantha. Moat was somewhere nearby, but detectives still didn't know exactly where. They offered a £10,000 reward for any information that could lead to the 37-year-old's capture.
I would ask people to keep contacting either Northumbria Police or Crime Stoppers with any information they believe may be relevant. There is a £10,000 reward for information which leads to the detention of Mr. Moat.
The media interest in the case was intensifying, with rolling 24-hour news reports. By Thursday, the 8th of July, Moat had now been on the run for 5 days, but the police had finally made a breakthrough.
One of the most curious twists in this whole story, that at one stage, a few days into the manhunt, police were telling us they believe that Moat was holding 2 hostages. But then, strangely, this story twisted round. The next thing we hear is that the police have arrested 2 men, Ness and one, who they now tell us they believe were friends and aiders and abettors of the runaway man, Raoul Moat. Within 24 hours, he'd gone from 2 hostages to 2 men arrested, believed to have some involvement in Moat's escape and perhaps even the shootings itself.
The arrest of Moat's accomplices, 26-year-old Carl Ness and 23-year-old Karam Awan, was a mere sideshow to the manhunt around Rothbury. By now, the media had been issued with a news blackout.
Not a complete blackout, but a blackout on some of the personal details that clearly they felt was stirring up Moat even more, making him even more potentially dangerous.
The hunt for Raoul Moat had elevated the killer to a bizarre cult status.
So for some people, Raoul Moat is an anti-hero. He represents somebody who stands up to authority, somebody who doesn't follow the rules. And for some people, that's something to be admired, unfortunately.
Moat's time was running out. On Friday, the 9th of July, a local resident spotted a man walking next to the river in Rothbury.
She approached a police patrol who went down to check it out. As soon as Moat saw the police vehicle, he sunk to his knees, put the gun to his head, and that's when the standoff started.
Some of those images will live with me forever. I can remember them vividly, live, constantly going back to seeing what was happening. Moat on his knees. That riverbank is the abiding image of Raoul Moat in almost everybody's mind.
On the evening of Friday, the 9th of July, the nation was glued to their television sets as the drama unfolded. But this wasn't a film, it was real life. The police were dealing with a man who was erratic, armed, and extremely dangerous.
We had police negotiators who were there on the scene, face to face, who spent the next 6 hours or so speaking to him and trying to persuade him that the right thing to do was put the gun down and surrender himself to custody.
The police were determined to make sure that Moat came out of the standoff alive. The presence of the media added extra pressure on their performance.
You're there focused on doing your job, but you're doing your job in the knowledge that there's lots of people watching you, scrutinising you, and some of them judging you.
But Moat wasn't planning on giving himself up so easily, and the case continued to attract media attention.
Extraordinary part of this story was the involvement of celebrities. Almost as the manhunt came to its dramatic and fatal climax, we got the almost bizarre scene of Gaza, Paul Gascoigne, famous England footballer, turning up in his dressing gown, claiming to know Raoul Moat and offering Moat chicken and lager if he gave himself up. Didn't come to anything. The police just asked Gaza to politely leave the town and had nothing more to do with it.
As the night of Friday, the 9th of July, turned into the early hours of Saturday, the situation remained tense. Negotiations with Moat weren't working, and he remained where he was, with a gun pointed at his own head.
It was an incredibly long and tense night. Darkness fell. We really could see very little of what was going on. We could just see the outlines of the police cordon, and the night dragged on after midnight into the small hours, and it was around 1 o'clock in the morning when there was a dramatic series of events. Hard to make out. It was confused, it was dark, it was very difficult to know exactly what the sequence of events were.
In one last attempt to capture Moat, the police decided to use a taser on the 37-year-old. they were determined to take him alive.
On this occasion, the tasers that were used were long tasers, like shotgun-style tasers, which hadn't yet been approved for use by the police. When you're in a mindset and a determination to arrest somebody, to call them to account for the crimes that they've committed in the safest possible way, then it was right and proper that it was given a try. It didn't work.
At approximately 1:15 a.m. on Sunday the 10th of July, the sound of a shotgun blast, followed by shouting, signalled that Raoul Moat had taken his own life.
I don't think the police had any chance of talking Raoul Moat down. He wanted to be iconic, he wanted to be infamous, he wanted to go out with a bang and not a whimper.
A 7-day manhunt and a 6-hour standoff had come to a dramatic conclusion.
He clearly had decided that he didn't want to be taken captive. He didn't want another sentence in jail again. This was it. This was his final stand. This was the moment he decided to pack up, give up, not be taken again.
With Moat dead, the police focused their attention on those who'd aided him during the 7 days. In March 2011 at Newcastle Crown Court, Moat's two accomplices, 26-year-old Carl Ness and 23-year-old Karam Awan, were convicted of conspiracy to murder, attempted murder and armed robbery. Awan was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years, while Ness was further convicted of murder and a firearms offence and sentenced to a minimum 40 years. Awan's defence solicitor told reporters, "This trial is Hamlet without the prince."
They were Moat's assistants. They were, in every sense, the sorcerer's apprentice. They were there to facilitate Moat's plan, which was to become famous. He wanted his 15 minutes of celebrity, and boy, he was going to get them.
In a further tragic turn, in February 2012, PC David Rathband took his own life. Unable to cope with his blindness since the shooting, he hanged himself. His colleagues at Northumbria Police believe that 44-year-old David had become Moat's second victim.
David's involvement in this case, he was a police officer doing his job in uniform to the best of his ability, and without warning, he suffered horrific injuries that changed his life and, in my view, ultimately led to his death. And I will always hold Raoul Moat responsible for killing David Rathband.
These people do these things and they don't think about the consequences of the people that they leave behind. They said it would get easier, but no, it gets harder.
Everybody talks about the Raoul Moat case. This started as the Christopher Brown murder inquiry. My team that investigated it continued to be the Christopher Brown murder inquiry. The only thing he did wrong was he fell for a girl who Moat believed was his possession, and he would use any force to deal with that, and he did. And we should never forget that Christopher was the first victim here.
Christopher was a very happy-go-lucky, fun-loving person. He was a good son, he was a good friend to his friends, a good brother to his sister. He's never out of our thoughts. I just miss him so much.
Raoul Moat was full of rage when he left Durham prison on July the 1st, 2010. But no one could have imagined the lengths he would go to in order to get back at his girlfriend. His murderous rampage left an innocent man dead, executed in cold blood, his ex-girlfriend wounded and scarred for life, and a police officer blind and suicidal. All this before turning the gun on himself. His selfish lust for revenge and notoriety turned him into the most infamous man in Britain, and one of the world's most evil killers. 18th of September 2012, Manchester, England. PC's Fiona Bone and Nicola Hughes were responding to a reported burglary. As they approached the house, they were mercilessly shot dead at point-blank range.
I was a police officer for 31 years. I never saw anything approaching this in all my time in the police. And I hope to God I never see the like of it again.
Their families were left devastated.
You never expected to plan your child's funeral. From then on, it was oblivion.
They'd been lured into a trap by a notorious gangster, 29-year-old Dale Cregan. The callous hitman had a vendetta against the police.
What makes Cregan such an evil killer is firstly his complete lack of remorse, and secondly it's his narcissism, that he is basking in the attention that these murders brought with them.
Driven by revenge, Cregan had been on a killing spree, taking 4 lives, including a father and son. Extraordinarily, he was the first criminal to commit murder on British soil using a grenade, a weapon of war. All of this makes Dale Cregan one of the world's most evil killers. The 25th of September 2012, Manchester in the north of England. A week after Britain's first ever killing of 2 female officers in the line of duty, the nation mourned the loss of 2 young women, 32-year-old Fiona Bone and Nicola Hughes, who was just 23. Greater Manchester Police were coordinating one of the biggest manhunts in UK history, as well as dealing with the devastating impact of losing 2 of their own.
People assume that police officers are immune to dealing with violence. We're not. We see some pretty horrific things as part of the job. But this was different. This had a feel of being something different. They were someone's mum, sister, daughter, and they had an absolute right to go home that night to their loved ones. And that animal took that away.
Local gangster Dale Cregan had ambushed Fiona and Nicola during a routine call-out, then mercilessly fired 32 rounds at the unarmed officers.
The impact on the nation was extraordinary. The killing of 2 innocent policewomen by a madman, a monster.
As Manchester lined the streets for Fiona and Nicola's funerals, grief brought the community even closer to the police. It would change policing in the city forever.
I think this is one of those cases that people remember because the kind of level of fear and anxiety that this created was unprecedented. But also it highlighted how dangerous this job can be and how police officers put their lives on the line every day to keep the rest of us safe.
In the 4 months leading up to the murders, Dale Cregan had already established himself as a ruthless killer. He shot father and son David and Mark Short dead in 2 gangland attacks, then used a grenade to blow up David Short's body.
I remember at the time there was a feeling of unease amongst the public. You don't expect grenades to be used on the streets of Greater Manchester. That was something which had never been encountered before and gave us an indication of how dangerous this individual was.
For Cregan, it wasn't enough to kill his victims. He had to completely obliterate them. And this signature of the grenade that he claimed for himself does give this case something really sinister.
This killer's story begins on the 6th of June 1983. Dale Cregan was born in Ashton-under-Lyme. He grew up in nearby Droylsden, a working-class suburb of Manchester. He was one of 4, with a brother and 2 sisters.
This was at a time when the city was kind of going into a bit of a post-industrial decline. The area where Cregan grew up was known for having quite a tough reputation. And I think when you look at these communities at this point in time, you've got this kind of culture of toughness and stoicism and resilience. And with that there comes a particular type of masculinity, a kind of quite toxic form of masculinity that values violence. And I don't think Cregan had a very easy time of it as a child. He was bullied. He was smaller than the other kids. He was quite angelic looking, and that made him a bit of a target.
At school, Cregan struggled academically.
Dale Cregan was a remote, self-centred, ambitious boy who didn't fit in. At school, he always thought he was better than the rest. But what that meant was that he created his own private universe.
Cregan, the outsider, would escape to the fields and mete out his revenge on the wildlife he found.
Well, as a young age, Cregan started killing animals, and this desensitized him to killing. He also wanted to skin the animals and just show dominance over them and destroy things, destroy living things. It serves as a form of desensitization to killing and hurting living things.
The hunting and skinning of wild rabbits meant young Cregan also became adept at using a knife. This progressed into something more sinister.
He started with a fascination of knives, and it increased to weapons and to guns. Anything involved with killing, destroying, weapons, hurting, violence. This all was very interesting to Cregan, and that was part of his personality.
Hurting people or animals gave Cregan a sense of reality. He knew full well that he could use violence to re-tip the scales. He thought that it made him more powerful.
Through his hunting adventures, Cregan also escaped the troubles at home. When he was young, his father walked out on the family.
Basically, Cregan decided that he would take on the adult role. He would man up and look after the family. And that altered the way he saw himself.
At the same time he's been bullied and demeaned and suffering the effects of that, he has to kind of step up and be the man of the household. So he's quite conflicted, and I think this is something that underlies the violence he goes on to commit.
At the age of 16, Cregan left full-time education. The outcast who was once bullied found a new sense of belonging and the respect he craved by joining local gangs.
Cregan wanted to make his mark in Manchester, which was dominated by gang culture. Gangs were everything. If you were in one, you were a man, you were someone to be respected. If you weren't, you were nobody. Cregan embraced that completely. He wanted to be part of a gang, a man to be feared. It gave him a sense of belonging.
There's a sense of territorialism, and very often you don't have a lot of empathy for who you consider to be your enemies. His role models are violent men. The people that the community look up to are people who aren't afraid to use physical force to get the things that they want. So it's incredibly important in shaping him.
Although he touted himself as a plasterer, soon Cregan made his real money on the side as a drug dealer, selling cannabis on his local patch.
At school, Cregan had experimented with cannabis. As soon as he left, he started selling. He also started using and selling cocaine. It was something that he felt gave him power and control over vulnerable people. He was someone to be respected and taken seriously.
At the age of 19, Cregan set off on a working holiday to Tenerife in the Canary Islands. Here he had his first taste of organised crime, persuading elderly holidaymakers to invest their life savings into a timeshare racket.
Cregan was eminently believable, charismatic. He could persuade people, perhaps who were a little gullible, to part with many thousands of pounds for a timeshare, which in fact didn't exist. But that was one of Cregan's great abilities, one of his talents.
Cregan stealing money from older people doesn't surprise me at all. Older people are weak. They're a target. He could get over on older people. And so he'd rip them off. That means nothing to him. This is how he sees the world. He was antisocial to the core. This is the lifestyle he chose.
Here we've got somebody who is not afraid to break the rules to get what they want, whether that's instrumental things like money, or whether that's expressive things like power and a feeling of worth, status or recognition.
Cregan returned to his drug dealing. He made a lot of money quickly, and this funded exotic trips to all corners of the globe. One, though, would cement his reputation as a hard-man criminal.
Cregan allegedly lost his eye in Thailand, where he tried to rip off a local gangster, and that local gangster had tortured him and gouged out his eye. Now, for most people, this kind of thing would be incredibly traumatic and very destabilising, but Cregan took it as something that he could use to carve out a brand, to carve out an identity.
He used his gouged out eye as a badge of honor to show just how tough and how ruthless he is.
In the wake of the loss of his eye, he looked terrifying. Cregan was now what he wanted people in Manchester to think of him: swashbuckling, frightening, hard man.
28-year-old Cregan had built up a reputation as a violent, drug-dealing criminal with 17 convictions, including affray and assault. He was deeply entrenched in organised crime.
Cregan was very well known to the police. He was a violent serial offender. He was a prominent member of the organised crime groups. He was a vile individual and a blister on the side of Greater Manchester. He was a threat to anybody who he encountered.
Two rival criminal families, the Shorts and the Atkinsons, had been involved in sporadic clashes, both vying for control of their local turf. The Shorts family was headed by its patriarch, David Short.
At the time, we were well aware that there was a really dangerous situation brewing, and some quite drastic measures had to be taken to try and intervene and arrest the offenders. And arrests were made at the time. But we work in a criminal justice system as checks and balances, and it's very, very difficult to take people off the streets.
On the 13th of May, Manchester City had beaten arch-rivals Manchester United to the top of football's Premier League. At the Cotton Tree pub in Droylsden, drinks had been flowing all day, and tempers between the Shorts and the Atkinsons began to fray.
Football rivalry gone mad, but it gave Dale Cregan the opportunity to redress the balance amongst the Manchester gangs, and it started with a bottle thrown.
These are two individuals who are associated with apparently rival families in this area, and because this isn't the kind of thing that is left to lie, it was never going to end with this.
Dale Cregan was close to the Atkinson family, so he wanted to settle the score on their behalf. To do this, he had rival patriarch David Short clearly in his sights.
Because of this apparently meaningless incident, everything was ratcheted up a notch or two, and revenge was necessary. Cregan decided that he would take it on behalf of the Atkinsons.
2 weeks later, on the 25th of May, Cregan and three accomplices drove to the scene of the first argument, the Cotton Tree pub in Droylsden. He was armed with a 9mm Glock pistol.
I think for Cregan, this was something that was very significant. This was going to cement his reputation as this fearsome gangster who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted.
11:49 p.m, CCTV shows a car pulling up outside the Cotton Tree with its hazard lights flashing. Inside the pub, David Short and his 23-year-old son Mark were playing pool with family and friends. Armed and wearing a balaclava, Cregan ran into the pub.
In less than half a minute, Cregan had fired 7 shots.
With David Short nowhere to be seen, Cregan shot son Mark 3 times in the chest. 3 men with them were also wounded. CCTV shows Cregan's getaway. The whole incident lasted just 24 seconds.
It's just utter devastation in this pub. And just to give some sense of how quickly this happened, David goes off to the toilet, leaves everybody having a good time, playing pool, having a drink. And when he returns, he finds that his son is fatally injured. Other people are injured as well.
David Short sobbed as son Mark died in his arms.
They wanted to kill Short's father. The father wasn't there, so you killed the son. Kill somebody in the family. It was a revenge killing.
But soon David Short's grief would turn to anger.
This is an absolute blitz on this family, on this community. It's absolutely shocking stuff.
Cregan realised at once that only killing Mark Short and not his father David left him with a big problem. There were going to be repercussions, and there were going to be violent repercussions. Revenge was necessary.
Despite David Short potentially having a clear idea of the identity of his son's murderer, in his gangland world, it wasn't as simple as relying on the police to bring Cregan to justice.
Not surprisingly, David Short wasn't keen to talk to the police. That would be to break the omerta of the Manchester gangs. No, there was never going to be any firm evidence. It was going to be done privately.
In order to avoid the revenge of the Short family and awkward questions from the police, Cregan fled to Thailand while the dust settled.
I think it reveals how hedonistic he is, that he's only concerned about him having a good time and is prepared to just kind of draw the line and forget that he's just murdered somebody. But also, I think he would have feared for his own life at this point and feared that retaliation. So he needed that distance to figure out what he was going to do next.
When Cregan flew back into Manchester on the 12th of June, the police were waiting for him at the airport. He was arrested and taken in for questioning, but lack of evidence made their job extremely difficult.
Greater Manchester Police had their suspicions about Dale Cregan, but what they didn't have was firm evidence to put before the Crown Prosecution Service.
Greater Manchester Police did everything it possibly could to take him and his associates off the streets, but there are limitations. We can only do so much. I know from my experience at the time how many resources were put into this, but sadly, policing's an imperfect science. We can't always achieve everything with 100% success. On this occasion, it led to tragic consequences that he was able to evade arrest.
Over the next 3 months, the police built the case against Cregan. Once they had more evidence, they attempted to rearrest him at home on August the 7th, but he was nowhere to be seen. Cregan had disappeared further north to Bowness in the Lake District, after hearing his accomplices had been arrested. Whilst on the run, he made plans to finish the job he'd botched the first time around, the execution of David Short.
It was now a race to kill or be killed. Cregan knew that he should have killed David Short and that he had to do so. Short, for his part, was already threatening Cregan and his family. It was only a matter of time. It was simply a question of who got there first.
In order to plan his next move, Cregan familiarised himself with 46-year-old David Short's movements. The grieving father visited his son's grave at Droylsden Cemetery every day. This was the opportunity Cregan had been looking for.
I don't think that bothered Cregan at all, that Short was at a gravesite mourning his son. That didn't bother him. His job was to kill him, and so kill him. That's it. Wait till he goes to the grave. He's going to be unarmed, by himself, out in the open. Kill him there. In Cregan's mind, that was a good idea. It was a good way to accomplish the goal.
On the 10th of August, Cregan and another violent criminal acquaintance, Anthony Wilkinson, waited at the cemetery for David to arrive. On this occasion, however, David broke his routine. When their target didn't appear, Cregan and Wilkinson were driven by another accomplice in a rental van to David's house just over a mile away. Here they lay in wait for their moment. Before long, it came.
On this particular day, David was going to have a family barbecue. He was carrying some chrome furniture through from the car into the house, and he was chatting with his neighbours. Everything appeared to be normal. And he leaves the front door open as he's taking things in from the car. Now, Cregan and his associates seize this opportunity. They very quickly exit the van and run into the house after David.
Cregan and his sidekick Wilkinson shot David multiple times. As they cornered him in an alleyway, Cregan delivered 3 final bullets to the head at point-blank range.
David Short was clearly dead. But Cregan did not want to stop there. He wanted to be infamous, the Manchester gangster everyone remembered. And so he took out a grenade, a weapon only used during war, and exploded it on David's body, literally destroying him.
This was the first time a grenade had been used in a murder on mainland British soil.
The scene would have been one of absolute devastation. This is a military weapon. This is not the sort of thing that you come across even in very serious crime. This is absolutely unprecedented, and the injuries that he suffered would certainly have been comparable with those that one would expect in a war zone.
Cregan and his fellow gangsters then drove back to Droylsden, where he hurled a second grenade at the home of another family they had a grievance with. Then he used a third and final explosive to blow up their van before fleeing the scene. Luckily, there were no further casualties, but gangster Cregan had left his mark.
There's a very powerful message being sent out here. I'm not just going to kill this person, I'm going to absolutely obliterate them. And the grenade becomes part of Cregan's signature. This is my calling card.
Unfazed by the devastation they'd left in their wake, Cregan and his accomplice stopped to buy ice pops during their getaway. 29-year-old Cregan had succeeded in making himself one of Manchester's most feared gangsters. He was on the run after murdering Mark and David Short. But this was no ordinary killing. For the first time in mainland Britain, a grenade was used in a murder. A bomb disposal unit was brought in and residents were evacuated due to a ruptured gas main caused by the explosion. In response, Greater Manchester Police launched Operation Dakar to hunt Cregan down.
Greater Manchester Police threw absolutely everything that we had in the search for Cregan. He was the #1 wanted individual in Greater Manchester, if not the whole of the UK. We knew he was a very dangerous individual.
The use of hand grenades in crime is almost unprecedented. They are totally indiscriminate and will cause serious and significant injury to anybody who's within quite a few yards. So to use a weapon like this shows a total disregard for human life and for the concerns of anybody else who might be in the vicinity.
It wasn't only his vendetta against the Short family that made Cregan the prime suspect. Forensics work on the half-destroyed van he left near the scene found fingerprints belonging to the killer and his accomplices.
Now, the police had a clear target and forensic evidence to back it up, which put Dale Cregan firmly in the frame.
The police also found Cregan's DNA and saliva on an ice pop wrapper left in their abandoned getaway car. Here too they discovered Cregan's fingerprints all over the inside of the Ford Fiesta, together with empty ammunition cases and the gun magazine. All evidence was pointing towards the one-eyed gangster.
It was obviously incredibly important to put Cregan behind bars. We knew that this feud was escalating out of all proportion, and at the time, we didn't know where it was going to end.
14 armed response vehicles were patrolling Manchester at any one time. Meanwhile, Cregan and his accomplices had fled 45 miles northeast to Leeds, before travelling another 250 miles south to Herne Bay in Kent.
The police issued a photo fit of Dale Cregan, and warned everyone that he was potentially armed and dangerous.
By the middle of August, a price was put on Cregan and Wilkinson's heads. First, the police offered a £25,000 reward. 2 weeks later, this was doubled. The pressure proved too much for Wilkinson, and he handed himself in. A £50,000 reward still stood for information on Cregan's whereabouts, but people who knew Cregan were too afraid to come forward.
The people who had contact with him knew exactly what he was capable of, and you can't spend that money if you're dead. And they knew exactly what the threat was to them. So sadly, they don't think any amount of money would have caused people to have given him up.
Wanted posters were put up across the city of Manchester, and Cregan's face even appeared on the big screens at football matches. Cregan's family and close criminal associates were placed under the watchful eye of the police. But nothing led the investigators to the killer.
Cregan was well aware that the police were after him. He was intent on not giving up without a fight, and so he laid a plan. His plan was to go out in infamy.
On the 17th of September, just 7 miles from his home, Britain's most wanted man forced his way into the house of a former acquaintance. He threatened him with a grenade placed on his mantelpiece if he didn't keep his silence.
He goes to the house of a barber and essentially holds him hostage and gets him to trim his hair and trim his beard. This is a guy who wants his mugshot to look as good as it possibly can look. So this is real premeditation. This is real narcissism.
Well, it's his image. Before he knew he was going to be arrested and be on TV and so on, he wanted himself to look good. That's Cregan. Everything is his image.
As the barber's partner and young daughter cowered upstairs, Cregan binged on beer and cigarettes as he enjoyed what he planned to be his last night of freedom. The next day, on the 18th of September, Cregan loaded his Glock semi-automatic pistol with extra ammunition for his final act of terror.
The Glock pistol that he used normally has a 17-round magazine. The fact that Cregan used a 32-round magazine just shows, if you like, that he really wanted to do as much harm, cause as much damage as he possibly could. And those 32 rounds could be fired without changing the magazine, of course. All he had to do was keep pulling the trigger.
That morning, police officers Fiona Bone and Nicola Hughes were starting their early shift. 32-year-old Fiona was making plans for her forthcoming civil partnership. She had a daughter, aged 5, with her fiancé.
I actually knew Fiona. I was the shift inspector at Tameside when she joined the shift as a brand new recruit from training school. She was bubbly, she was friendly, she did everything he asked of her with a smile on her face, she was keen to learn. She was just everything you would expect of a young police officer.
Her 23-year-old colleague, Nicola, was only 3 years into her job as a police constable.
You get that sense of pride that, you know, what she's doing, she's out policing the streets, she's out protecting the public, and she was proud of what she was doing, she was proud of wearing the uniform. She was just life and soul of the party at 6 o'clock in the morning when they're all just going on shift, she's laughing and joking. I knew there'd be times where she'd face dangerous situations and assaults and fights, but yeah, I mean, the overall feeling was quite proud.
Partway through Nicola and Fiona's morning shift, at 10:14 a.m, Dale Cregan made a 999 emergency call.
Police emergency. I had someone just threw a big concrete slab through my back window and ran off.
Britain's most wanted man posed as a worried resident, Adam, who'd been a victim of crime.
Was he a white male?
He had an adult mate, so I couldn't really tell you, but...
He was a male, though, yeah?
Yeah, he was a male.
Cregan was planning an ambush on the police. With a clear view of the road ahead, he lay in wait. He had chilling words to end his call.
All right, then. Thanks very much.
Okay.
I'll be waiting.
The call was pretty innocuous, the sort of thing which, you know, Greater Manchester police officers deal with every day. So Nicola and Fiona went to investigate.
38 minutes later, unarmed, Fiona and Nicola arrived at the door.
As the two policewomen walked up the path towards the front door, Cregan threw it open and began firing. 32 shots had been fired.
So the brutality of this attack was horrific. He was just utterly remorseless. He kept going. He kept deciding to pull that trigger. There was no hesitation whatsoever.
Despite being hit between 5 and 8 times, Fiona tried to deploy her taser gun. Cregan's response was a final shot through the heart, killing her instantly. Her colleague Nicola couldn't move after a bullet had severed her spinal cord. Cregan then mercilessly shot her 3 times in the head at point-blank range.
After he'd emptied his firearm, that was not it. It was not over. He takes out a grenade and throws it. So he's not just killing his victims, he's obliterating them. And I think that's what he wants to be known for. By killing 2 police officers, he's securing that attention that he so desperately wants.
The whole attack lasted just 31 seconds.
I think it's fair to say that the moments after the attack, the minutes after the attack, the police control room was absolute chaos. But very quickly a picture started to emerge, and Greater Manchester deployed armed officers into Tameside straight after the attack.
In a desperate attempt to save their colleagues, unarmed units nearby rushed to the scene.
That shows the bravery of police officers. They're not armed. They knew something horrific had happened. They drove straight to the danger to help the colleagues and help the public. Sadly, it was too late.
Nicola was rushed to Tameside Hospital by paramedics, where she later was pronounced dead. Her father, Bryn, was driving home from work when he got a call from the police.
There was a to and fro of like, where are you, and I need to speak to you. And then automatically then you start to think something's not quite right here. And I said, well, tell me what's wrong. I'm outside your house. And then when you hear those words, I'm outside your house, that's when alarm bells start ringing and you panic. And I didn't even register what was being said as well at the time. And then eventually I said to him, don't you dare tell me she's dead. And that's when he said, there's no easy way of saying it. And from then on, it was, oblivion. I didn't know where I was, I didn't know where I was driving. And it was a journey that would take usually 10, 15 minutes, but it seemed to take hours.
Cregan's first 2 victims had been embroiled in the feuding gangland world he was part of. But these 2 young police officers were completely unknown to him.
By this time, Cregan had realised that there was no escape. He chose to kill 2 innocent policewomen because it was to be his gravestone, his legacy, the thing that ensured his infamy in the hierarchy of infamous criminals.
He wants to be the biggest gangster in Manchester and be seen as this fearsome character who nobody's going to mess with.
On this day, we saw the worst that any police force can ever experience. 2 innocent young officers murdered.
As Greater Manchester Police was learning the devastating truth about their fallen comrades, Dale Cregan had already decided on his next move.
He lured unarmed, unprotected young officers to the door of that house and murdered them in cold blood. He then went to the police station and handed himself in, because in his pathetic mind, he thought that the colleagues may shoot him.
The reason he's doing this is firstly to stay in control, because for Cregan, being in control, being the director of his own gangster movie is very important to him. But there's also an element of fear here. He does not want to die. He does not want to be killed. And I think he's actually afraid of being killed in a police shootout. He thinks they're not going to show him very much mercy because he's just cold-bloodedly murdered 2 of their officers. So he's in self-preservation mode at this time.
Seeing 2 of their own killed in the line of duty sent shockwaves throughout Greater Manchester Police.
Walking into that police station, I'll never forget it. The faces People had a 1,000-yard stare. Nobody could believe that you come on work and this happens. Fiona was planning a wedding in a break time, and then she wasn't there. Imagine the impact that has on family, friends, colleagues who were sat at 7 o'clock in the morning making cups of tea and chatting about what they were going to do that day. It just beggars belief that they were put through that. And they came back to work and policed the streets of Greater Manchester. And what a fantastic tribute that is to their memory, that they kept going. They were professional, committed, just like Nicola and Fiona.
Cregan, however, seemed to revel in his killings. In custody, he told the police it was revenge for hounding his family whilst on the run. He only seemed to have one regret.
Cregan says, I'm sorry that they weren't men. He wants to be this kind of old-school style gangster who doesn't hurt women and children.
Because killing 2 female is not as high status in Cregan's mind than to killing 2 male. That really doesn't fit in with the image that he wants to project to everybody else. If you took his image away from him, what do you have left with Cregan? Nothing. There's nothing there. There's this total nothingness, inadequacy in every respect. He feels so weak and inadequate, and that's why he has to demonstrate what a powerful force he is.
The city of Manchester was united in grief for the fallen officers. A week after Nicola's murder, her father Bryn attended a vigil arranged by the local community for his daughter and her colleague Fiona.
And you got that sense of shock and outrage and grief from the community. The police, they deal with murders day in, day out, but not their own. So I think for them as well, it was a massive shock, massive outpouring of grief from, not just Greater Manchester Police, but every police force in the country.
There was a bond created between Greater Manchester Police and its communities. They came together, and I'll never forget that.
This Manchester spirit was truly brought out 2 weeks later on the 3rd of October, the day of Nicola Hughes's funeral.
I'll never forget standing at the bottom of Market Street, and it was like a Derby Day football game. People were pouring down Market Street, wearing black ties. It was absolutely humbling. I heard a story about a group of officers having done a full night shift and drove to Manchester to stand with their colleagues. That was incredible. Shops closed, banks closed, Manchester came out. It was incredible.
When Nicola's father, Bryn, arrived, he saw thousands of well-wishers lining the streets on the route to Manchester Cathedral.
At the back of your mind, you think, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this. It was like a huge tunnel of faces, and you recognise some, and there's people crying and the people clapping, and I think you soak that up. It's like an energy, but it helps you get through the day.
Fiona's funeral followed the next day on the 4th of October. Again, Manchester paid its respects. 4 months later, on the 4th of February 2013, serial killer Dale Cregan finally faced justice. 120 armed police officers were used to ferry Britain's most wanted killer from Strangeways Prison to Preston Crown Court each day.
This was one of the biggest trials in recent times, certainly in the northwest of England, if not the country. And Cregan had to be housed securely and taken to court every day. And there was a massive security operation.
Armed police were placed on the roofs surrounding the court building so that nothing was left to chance. 9 other accomplices also faced trial on charges of murder and attempted murder. Despite confessing to his murders, Cregan opted to plead not guilty on all counts.
That animal forced the family and colleagues to go through a trial. The judge commented on how he tried to manipulate proceedings for his own amusement. He had no remorse. He was a monster.
Cregan, horrifying though it may sound, wanted to bask in his own infamy. He wanted no one ever to forget the one-eyed Manchester gangster.
He was characteristically arrogant, tried to feign disinterest. To use an old-fashioned phrase, he was trying to play to the gallery as well to some extent. But I think everybody in that room knew exactly what kind of person he was.
In a final act of manipulation from the dock, Cregan decided to change his pleas during the 18-week trial, pleading guilty to all 4 murders. On the 13th of June 2013, it was game over for Dale Cregan when he was given a whole life sentence. 5 of his criminal accomplices were each sentenced to between 7 and 35 years in prison.
Cregan was one of very few people to receive a whole life order for 4 murders, so he will never be released from prison. He'll never have the chance for parole, and these sentences are reserved for the most serious violent offenders who've done the most harm and are perhaps the least likely to be rehabilitated. So this is very, very serious indeed.
For relatives and colleagues of his victims, they finally saw justice.
I mean, obviously we knew you can't commit 4 murders and not get a whole life tariff. To hear the judge actually say it, that's the big relief. And I think it's the relief that it's finally over. And they did finally got justice for what had happened to them.
It didn't seem to take away the sense of loss, though. 2 young colleagues had been cut down in the prime. There was nothing to celebrate. I know that across Greater Manchester Police, people felt the same. There was no celebration.
The murders of police officers Fiona Bone and Nicola Hughes had a lasting impact on policing the UK's second largest city, Manchester.
This did change policing in Greater Manchester, and I felt it almost immediately. What this did was show to everybody that police officers aren't just uniforms. These are somebody's daughters, sisters, mums. These are people who have the same problems in their lives, same stresses. It brought the communities closer to Greater Manchester Police.
As for Dale Cregan, after spending 5 years in Ashworth Psychiatric Unit in Merseyside, he was sent back to Her Majesty's Prison Strangeways in Manchester, where he'll likely spend his remaining days.
In his world, his pathetic world that exists in his head, he thought he was a big man. He'll die a pathetic, wizened old man in prison. What I want to do is highlight and contrast that against what Nicola and Fiona stood and still stand for, and that's decency, public service and compassion. Their names will never be forgotten.
To help cope with losing Nicola, her father Bryn set up a memorial fund in her name to support children who've also lost a loved one to murder or violent crime.
You're never going to forget what they've done. You're never going to forgive what they've done. But for me, I'd rather concentrate on Nicola, the memories of Nicola.
Dale Cregan gunned down a father and a son, then recklessly threw grenades onto the streets, putting the public in danger as part of a petty gangland feud. He mercilessly slaughtered 2 unarmed police officers with their whole lives ahead of them. He brought terror to the streets of Manchester, making Dale Cregan one of the world's most evil killers.